Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Apples, apples, apples. This is just way too funky. I think we're gonna start. You've got my phone. Or you've got your laptop. We're gonna start in about 5 minutes.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. 1 2 3. Testing, testing. Testing.
It's just the Good afternoon, all. Thank you for responding to the call to come here, Professor Jeffrey S. Khan, known in the community, the Haitian community in New York as Jeff. My name is Marie Lily Sarat. I'm the director of the CUNY Haitian Studies Institute. And before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge we are standing on the land of the unceded territory of the Lenape. And next to me is the president of the Haitian Student Association at Brooklyn College, the partner in with Professor Khan to the college to talk about Haitian navigators. A fascinating, fascinating subject matter. I'm going to let um, President Fabiola Emma Hassan say brief greetings, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about Professor Khan and his topic of conversation today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fabiola Sicilian. I'm the president, like Professor has said, of the Haitian American Student Association here at Brooklyn College, where it's a club for Haitian students and non-Haitian students. So it's a club for everyone, where we educate students on Haitian culture. So it can be like the food, the music, the history, past, present. And I'm grateful for your presence here today. As we are going to have a history dive over the Haitian forms of the 20th and the 21st century, where Professor Jeff will be talking about that. So, thank you for coming.
Okay. I will introduce the guest, our illustrious professor, or somebody who is very familiar with the Haitian community because he volunteered in the community many years ago, 20 years ago, assisting in literacy programs and English as a second language English survival programs with various people in the community, namely one of the people who may join us later is Jocelyn Mayas. Professor Khan is Associate Professor and Cultural Wing Chair at the Department of Anthropology at UC, University of California. He's an interdisciplinary scholar with training in law. He received his JD from Yale Law School and his PhD in anthropology from the University of Chicago. His interests include border policing, maritime commerce, seafaring knowledge, legal geography, semiotics, and ritual economies, among other topics. His first book, Islands of Sovereignty, Haitian Migration and the Borders of Empire, was awarded the Herbert Jacob Book Prize the the Law and Society Association, excuse me, the Avant-Garde Book Prize from the Asian Studies Association, the ICC Duarte Book Prize from the Latin American Studies Association, and the Book Prize of the American Political Science Association section on migration and citizenship. He's got other writings out there that are available to much to the entire scholarly and non-scholarly community. His work has appeared in Boston Review, Slate, and Just Security. And today, for his presentation, Professor Khan will explore the history of Haitian seafaring over the course of the 20th and 21st century and how it survived in the face of intensive maritime policing designed to limit the mobility of Black Haitian subjects. And our understanding this oceanic history reveals a great deal about how Haitians have shaped the geographies, economies, and politics of the Northern Caribbean. And in conversation with Professor Khan over the subject that he's exploring, we've shared many things. One of the things that we talked about is oftentimes people believe Haitian who are mariners, who are captains, only track, only carry people who are fleeing persecution in Haiti, or otherwise known as poor people, that they in the traffic that transport people across the waters to escape the political instability and nightmare that Haiti, unfortunately, has been frequently plunged under. But his work is delving a little bit deeper to say Haitians have not only done this kind of work, putting people in safe harbors in places where they may be safer, but also they have great commerce across the Caribbean, They have exchanges with various other islands, and they are innovators, thinkers. They are excellent at what they do. However, he feels if these Haitians were not black subjects, if they were different, so to speak, they would be getting a lot more recognition for the kind of inventiveness and creativeness that they deploy to maintain life and to create economies around the region. So I'm excited that we're all here and looking forward to Professor Khan's talk. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Lily. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really, really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. I just want to start off by thanking Lily for that lovely introduction, for making this possible, organizing this, and for her leadership. Studies Institute. It's really, I can see just from being here for a couple of hours, it's a really vibrant space, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you also, Fabiola, and to the Haitian American Students Association for supporting this as well, along with the other departments who helped make this possible. So the title of my talk is Haitian Navigators of the Northern Caribbean, Race, Agency, Power. And going back to 2005, I've been working on two related projects. So the first culminated in my first book, which Lily mentioned, Islands of Sovereignty, Haitian Migration and the Borders of Empire. In the broadest sense, the book examines how the U.S. externalized its immigration border by stopping migrants at sea before they reached U.S. shores. The U.S. government did this at first to contain Haitians specifically, right? Haitians and Haitian migration specifically. And the result was that it encased Haiti in an arc of offshore policing. So this offshoring of the U.S. immigration border began in 1981, and it was something new at the time, though it's now part of the standard border policing toolkit of the global north. So it's been exported. Now there's this great turn of phrase coined by anthropologist Eng Ho that speaks to this history in a way. And it goes like this, quote, "The imperial point of view is the view from the boat," end quote. So what does that mean? Well, he's referring to the view from the trading or military vessels that are the point of the spear of empire, so to speak. It's a viewpoint that's distant and menacing. It's the view from the imperial ship of state. So my first book literally ends with a view from the imperial ship of state. And here it is. The Coast Guard cutter patrolling. Coast Guard cutter is a Coast Guard vessel. A Coast Guard vessel patrolling Haitian seas. That's the Haitian coastline you're seeing. Looking for Haitian migrants. It's the view from a particular kind of boat. This footage is mine, and all footage that you'll see today is mine. But Eng Ho says that there are also other boats, often smaller boats. And there is the view from these other boats as well. And it's a view worth paying attention to. And this is what my current in-progress book is about. The view from other boats. If the first book is the story of how the U.S. constructed a legal and policing apparatus for containing Haitian mobility, the second book is about how Haitians continue to remain mobile, how they build lives and worlds in the shadow of these containment measures. To that end, I've been doing ethnographic field work in Haiti and the United States with Haitian sailors, captains, maritime merchants, boat migration, voyage organizers, seafaring migrants, boat builders, fishers, coastal traders, ritual specialists, and port workers, among others, since 2005. I have a range of arguments that I'd like to make in this book, and I'm going to share some of them with you today, but I obviously can't share all of them. So I'd like to highlight a couple of them. So one has to do with agency and the way geographies are made. This concerns what geographers call the production of space. This is the idea that geographies aren't a background given, but are produced. That is, they're made within limits by the way people move through their environment, alter it, and invest it with meaning. So it'd be easy to say that over the course of the late 20th century, the US has projected its power out into the Caribbean and remade its political, legal, and economic geography in the process. And it would also be easy to say that Haitians are not agents in this process. Right? That is, that they are passive recipients of the new geographies the US has made with its policing endeavors. Now, I certainly think the US has remade the geography of the Northern Caribbean, but I do not think that Haitians are passive recipients of those space-making projects without space-making. Though that's often how they're portrayed. And there's a long history of that kind of portrayal. That is, there's a long history of portraying Black subjects more generally as passive recipients of white space-making projects. As geographer Catherine McPitrick, among others who write in the Black geography tradition, have noted. This tendency to portray Black subjects as non-geographic is part of a longer tradition in the West of portraying Africa and its diaspora as outside of history, except insofar as that history is white history. So in my talk today and in this second in-progress book, I want to foreground how Black Haitian subjects also produce space in consequential ways. So a second overarching but linked argument has to do with the importance of the sea in all of this. More than 70% of the globe is covered in seawater. 76% of all trade involves some form of ocean transport. Still, most social science research is stubbornly land-bound. Historian Marcus Rediker refers to this as a scholarly terracentrism. Terracentrism is the idea that forms of social interaction that are really worth looking at happen on land. This terrestrial bias then allows what happens at sea to slip away to invisibility. Even maritime historians who ostensibly focus on the sea, Rediker says, treat oceans as, quote, unreal spaces, voids between the real spaces, end quote, of the world. Now, a similar bias, I think it would be fair to say, has long existed in Haitian studies as well. Until recently, scholarship on Haiti written by non-Haitians and Haitians alike has focused on the earth, the land, the agrarian sphere often. There's also often a moral and nationalist tone to this as well, with a true Haitian ethos being seen as existing in the rural interior of the country. So let me just give a couple of examples of this, what you might call apparent blind spot in Haitian studies when it comes to Haiti and the sea. Now, I absolutely adore the work of Trio, but what does he say about Haitian maritime life in the 19th century in his remarkable book on the historic roots of the Duvalier estate? He says, quote, "The merchant sector was dominated by foreigners because Haiti had no ships." But if we look at this excerpt from the trade records of the United States, we see that in 1885, 9 Haitian flagged vessels, meaning Haitian ships, were cleared to enter the United States with 1,400 466 tons of cargo. That's not a lot, but it's also not nothing. And we find traces of such ships in other records as well over the years. Historian Hank Gonzalez, who's at Cambridge, has written about the remarkable legal dispute over the seizure of a Haitian-owned vessel, the Deux Amis, in New York in 1837. Haitians, in other words, did indeed own vessels, and they did indeed trade internationally in the 19th century, moving goods at least as far as New York City. Now, Trio has written about the unthinkability of the Haitian Revolution for certain populations in Europe in the midst of its unfolding. So we might also ask about the unthinkability of the role Haitians have played in the maritime domain as well. Okay. So let me give you one more example, this taken from a book chapter penned by a geographer who works in Haiti. He writes, quote, "Living more than 4 centuries on an island, Haitians have not found a vocation as sailors. Haitians are a farming people who make their living from the earth." This is really striking. And in many ways, it's kind of conventional wisdom. But I want you to keep this characterization in mind, this image in mind as I continue through the talk. Okay. All right. So part of my contribution, so part of my book is in part about emphasizing the importance of an oceanic approach. In my case, an oceanic approach pursued through an oceanic anthropology. When one follows imperial ships of state and other boats out to new constellations, new formations, new worlds of interaction come into view. Part of my contribution lies in exploring the intersection of these concerns, the intersection of questions about the racialization of geographies and geographic agency, and questions around what an oceanic anthropology can reveal. One of my premises is that common sense notions regarding who belongs where, who is making history, and who is producing consequential geographies is shaped by processes of racialization. And one of my goals is to better understand how those processes of racialization operate. And I will argue that the sea plays a role here. And that's because at various moments in a wide array of dispersed communities, people have conceptualized who is fully human, who is a historical agent that is a world-shaping actor, based on their relation to the sea and seafaring mobility. And I'll return to this theme later in greater detail. But for now, let's chart our route. So first, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into the rise of U.S. maritime migration policing in regard to Haiti, but also take a look at some historical antecedents. Then I want to give you a sense of some Haitian maritime networks that have emerged over the course of the 20th century that reveal how incredible the Haitian sailing vocation is. And then I'll offer some concluding remarks, including some conceptual points that we can use to launch the Q&A. There's a lot of stuff I'm not going to talk about that will be in the book, including such things as the political mobilization of asylum seekers at Guantanamo, which is actually a key node in this Caribbean geography of Haitian seafaring mobility. Okay, but there's lots of stuff we can't talk about today. Just wanted to flag that down. All right, so the U.S. maritime migration policing that I mentioned already was not the first instance of foreign nations working to contain Haiti's maritime mobility, okay, and connectivity. As many of you know, during the 18th century, Haiti, then called Saint-Domingue, was the most lucrative colony in the world and the jewel of France's colonial possessions in the Americas. After the enslaved population rebelled in 1791 and eventually declared the island's independence in 1804, an it also became the first Black republic. And it was born into a world of hostility. It was born into an Atlantic world that relied on enslaved Black labor. And the slave-holding powers of the time feared what historian Julius S. Scott called, quote, an autonomous Black presence on the sea, end quote. This was both for the commercial power that a maritime presence would give Haiti, but also because of the ideas of Black freedom that would circulate along these maritime routes. As a result, the British imposed restrictions that prevented Haitian vessels from sailing beyond 15 miles of its shores during Toussaint Louverture's time in command of the colony. And French privateers seized both Haitian ships as well as ships of other nations trading with Haiti during the first 2 decades after independence, prior to French recognition of Haiti in 1825. And around that time, states in the US South began imposing restrictions on the circulation of free Black sailors into southern port cities. Charleston depicted one of the first. Part of the concern was just the sight of free Black maritime mobility. Right? The picture that free Black sailors presented to the enslaved population of the South's ports was too threatening for free whites to tolerate. All of this is to say that there was a deep concern on the part of slaveholding powers during the 19th century with regard to Black maritime mobility and Haitian maritime mobility in particular. The sea is not incidental here. Acceptable and unacceptable visions of what it means to be Black have been imagined in relation to the sea and movement upon it. And I'll return to this later. All right, now let's fast forward to the 20th century to the 1970s. Haitian sail freighters, Haitian-made sail freighters, Haitian wooden-made sail began arriving in South Florida, carrying asylum seekers at a regular clip beginning in 1972 and continuing into the present. Now, I'm going to give a really unforgivably brief accounting of this history, which I cover in greater detail in my first book. But basically, these Haitians are fleeing the dictatorship of Jean-Claude Duvalier, the then president for life of Haiti. The U.S. response is quite hostile to these asylum seekers for 2 reasons. One, a class-marked Haitian Blackness comes to signify in threatening, potent ways in South Florida during this period as something socially and biologically pathological. Part of this, of course, was the association of Haitians with AIDS, a long-standing trope that former President Trump recently his presidency. In the discourse of journalists, politicians, and even government bureaucrats, one can discern the sense that Haitian Blackness was construed as simultaneously more potent than American Blackness, more primitive, more African, and yet also more strangely mixed, right? An unfamiliar French-African amalgam. And this fuels this idea of what immigration officials called at the time the quote-unquote Haitian threat. So the second reason for the hostility is that Jean-Claude Duvalier was also a Cold War ally, and giving recognition to asylum claims was inconvenient for U.S. policy. A novel and highly effective Haitian rights movement that drew on connections across the diaspora from Miami to Canada was, however, able to prevent the U.S. from removing most of these Haitian asylum seekers. In my book, I demonstrate how this movement provided the template for much, much of the combined litigation and activism around immigrant rights that was to come in the years to follow. Frustrated by the incredible efficacy of these litigation and advocacy efforts, The Reagan administration responded in 1981 by essentially moving the immigration border of the United States out to sea to escape judicial oversight. The U.S. Coast Guard began cruising Haitian waters with the permission of the Haitian government and interdicting Haitian vessels in what was called for many years Haitian migrant interdiction operations. Over the course of the 1980s, the U.S. sends all but 6 of 20,461 interdicted Haitian asylum seekers back to Haiti. And this is possible because these interdictions are taking place at sea, beyond the reach of the court and out of sight of the public. Again, something I explore in depth in my first book. Now, just to give you a sense of what this policing meant materially, we can look at this map of offshore migration policing in the Northern Caribbean during the 1970s. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, what am I supposed to be seeing here? That's the correct reaction. And that's because there's nothing to see here, because this kind of offshore policing did not exist in the 1970s. So let's jump to 1981, 1982. These are what we call very rough ship tracks, capturing the routes of U.S. Coast Guard vessels tasked to migrant interdiction in 1981 and 1982, plotted using coordinates that Jessica Stowe and I have extracted from archived vessel logs and plotted using GIS software. So this is quite a difference. And it's meant to be felt as such. These patrols are largely invisible to U.S. publics, but Haitians were meant to see these vessels, to have a sense that they're there, waiting and watching. So for much of the 1980s, there were 2 Coast Guard cutters at a given time performing these patrols. During the early 1990s, following the ouster of Haiti's first democratically elected president, the Coast Guard intensified its presence. And the presence is often scaled back after migration spikes subside. But following a recent spike last year, it was up again. So there's this very palpable sense for many Haitians of being encased in U.S. policing power. Now, the U.S. Coast Guard and most journalists in the U.S. have framed this as a life-saving endeavor. Coast Guard maritime interdiction operations are, in other words, about saving Haitians from themselves. Take, for example, a segment from CNN by reporter Nick Patton-Wall from 2 summers ago. After footage of gang violence in Port-au-Prince, Haiti's capital, the segment cuts to shots of the coastal north of Haiti, and then of a wooden sail freighter allegedly preparing to carry asylum seekers north. As the camera pans over the vessel, Patton Walsh opines, the boat is aging, wraps of net plugging holes, engines not fixed yet. I mean, this is not something you want to be in on dry land, let alone out at sea for days. So this is the key part, right? This is not something you want to be in even on dry land, let alone out at sea for days. So I'd like to supplement this with a sampling of the way many journalists have described Haitian vessels used in migration voyages over the years. Here are some typical descriptors taken from actual journalistic accounts going back to the 1980s. They may be familiar to some of you. Okay. Unseaworthy, small, leaky, overcrowded, broken down, old, dilapidated, makeshift, decrepit, fragile, creaky, homemade, crude, rickety, flimsy, vermin-ridden, no more than splintery hulls, crude wooden tub of a sailboat, floating septic tanks resembling the drawing of a second grader. So these characterizations seem almost obligatory in journalistic accounts of Haitian boat migration. What are the sailors? Well, they often come across as inexperienced, bumbling, and cruel. So in other words, policing Haitian territorial becomes in this discourse an act of U.S. generosity and care. Haitian sailors are rendered incompetent and their passengers as desperate and passive. They and their vessels do not belong at sea. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, it would be fair to say that Haitians were the quintessential desperate refugees in colloquial. And they were called boat people. Think about the alchemy of that phrase, the way it equates persons and things. And in this instance, the way it equates persons with a devalued thing without value, the Haitian-made sail freighter. So what we're seeing here are racializing discourses about a group's capacities. And these discourses are worked out in important ways through the signifying affordances of the sea and seafaring technology, including boats. Okay. Now, by signifying affordances, I'm referring to how the materiality of vessels and the sea facilitates, but does not necessarily determine, certain interpretations of what is happening in the world, what is of value, who has agency, and who does not. So now I'm going to shift gears. I'd like to look at a quite different set of narrations of Haitian maritime mobility. They're informed by oral histories and my own participation in sailing and boat building ventures in Haiti, which also facilitated the collection of these oral histories. So in the northwest of Haiti, it's common knowledge among mariners that the Loiston family of La Tortue, or Tortuga, discovered the Bahamas sometime in the early 20th century, most likely the 1930s, or possibly earlier. What does this mean, discovered the Bahamas? Well, it means that the Loistons opened up a 460 or so mile trading route between Nassau on the island of New Providence and the northwest of Haiti. The story is told to me by one of the grandsons, now 80 years old himself, of the family patriarch Samuel, who led the first voyage to Nassau, went like this. Father Samuel, as he was called because of his prodigious knowledge of the Bible, and his three sons were involved in coasting. Haiti is a mountainous country, and roads are in extremely poor condition. So a significant amount of agricultural goods have been carried from coastal town to coastal town via wooden sail freighters known as sloops. A sloop is a single-masted vessel like the one shown here. On a trip to Cap Haitien, they met a conch trader from Grand Turk who spoke to them of the opportunities for trade in Nassau and the Bahamas. At the time, both the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos were British overseas colonies. The Loristons traveled with this conch trader back to the northwest from Cap Haitien, and he instructed them to load up their sloop with mahogany, tropical hardwood, and oak planks, which they did. They then traveled northward, powered only by the wind and guided only by compass. When they reached Nassau, they sold their hardwoods and loaded up with goods for the return voyage. Haitian-bound cargo tended to consist of tobacco, empty bottles, which ship owners would sell to the distillery in Port-au-Prince, and wooden barrels that they would sell to cane liquor distilleries for the storage of distilled cane liquor, clairin. Now, on the return voyage, the conch trader informed them he wouldn't be accompanying them, which threw the sons into a panic. But Father Samuel said he had already committed the route to memory, having internalized the compass headings, landmarks, and times between waypoints. This again is hundreds of miles of reefs, sandbars, and stretches where there's no land in sight, no power but the wind, and no instruments but a compass, right? And no charts. But Father Samuel brought them back safely. This opened up a regular and expanding trade with Nassau and various other islands in the Bahamian archipelago as his sons launched their own trading ventures as did their sons and the crews of ships who would take their own vessels up to the island, and so on and so forth. In addition to carrying agricultural products northward, they also began carrying people who provided low-cost labor in the growing Bahamian economy. These working sail routes were sustained up to the early 21st century, when the Bahamas began restricting sail freighters to the southernmost island of the archipelago, Great Anagua. These were the last working international sail routes in the Caribbean. So this is one set of transnational maritime routes forged by Haitian sailors, and it blends in with another. During the 1970s, there were several Haitian-owned, Haitian-captained motorized vessels that traded with the United States via Miami. They operated initially out of Haiti's capital, Port Saint-Marc, but to do so profitably depended on one's connections with the Duvalier dictatorship's patronage networks, which would impose heavy tariffs or waive them, and even turn a blind eye to contraband, depending on one's favorability with the regime. In the 1970s, one boat owner who was pushed out of the Port-au-Prince market after falling in favor with the regime moved his route out to the northwest, far from the capital, with the help of the Lauriston family, who, as described earlier, had opened the Nassau route. The Lauristons and others began sailing with this vessel, committing the compass directions, distances, and waypoints of the 650-mile route to Miami to memory and making their own contacts in Miami, docking on the Miami River. At first, some converted their sail freighters to motorized wooden freighters by reinforcing ribs and deck beams, installing Detroit diesel engines modified for marine use, and adding steering mechanisms. They would then sail them up and into the Miami River, load up with wholesale bulk foods, from rice to black beans, but also whiskey, and secondhand items from mattresses and refrigerators to salvage hotel carpeting and plastic. This expansion and democratization of the trade with Miami started in earnest in the early 1980s. Other boat designers designed and crafted specialized wooden freighters that were purely motorized. This is the interior of one in the process of being built in La Tortue a couple of years ago. To me, it's magnificent. The captains would dock up and down the Miami River, from downtown to the outer reaches of the 5-mile waterway at terminals that were little more than privately owned lots, whose owners opened them up for docking and loading. Traders with more capital would often shift to steel-hulled freighters, ranging from ships used in the Baltic and European riverways to shrimp boats and crew boats from the Gulf of Mexico, and eventually to 240-plus-foot steel-hulled general cargo vessels. But during the 1980s and 90s, many of the vessels were Haitian-owned, Haitian-made, and Haitian-captained, and piloted by memorized compass headings and knowledge of the sea and waypoint land. No charts. Again, it's amazing. The memory required, the intelligence required. These traders began linking up Haitian provincial ports with Miami right as the U.S. began cracking down on sail freighter migration vessels with the launch of offshore maritime migration interdiction operations. Right? Great placement of Haiti I described earlier. While this maritime wall vis-a-vis migrant vessels went up, Haitian captains of motorized freighters could sail into Miami without so much as a visa. All they needed was a Haitian passport and an exit. This disparity between the policing of migrant vessels and policing of the freighters is a remarkable contradiction. By the late 1990s, however, the Haiti trade in Miami had been thoroughly associated with segments of the South Florida public imagination with a racialized aesthetics of disorder, degradation, and criminality. Efforts to gentrify the Miami River waterfront curiously intersected with Coast Guard efforts to regulate all of the wood-hulled freighters out of Miami, and joint federal and state law enforcement actions specifically targeting the Haitian freighters, all of which put tremendous pressure on freight brokers. Just as the pathologization of Haitian black provided a sense of urgency for maritime migration policing in the early 1980s, so too did variations of it shape the discourse around the Haiti trade and its dangers in the 1990s and 2000s. New licensing regimes established in the early 2000s also largely drew Haitian captains off the river along with Haitian officers, forcing Haitian boat owners to contract crewing agencies to operate their own vessels. 2 years ago, I traveled down to Haiti on this 105-foot freighter. It was the last vessel trading with Miami, owned and captained by Haitians, themselves sons of the captain who had traveled the working sail route between La Tortue and Nassau for decades, and grandsons of the captain who had sailed with the Stone. I want to emphasize that the existence of these roots of almost universally overlooked maritime connection is rather incredible, in the sense that in many ways, these are unthinkable economies and unthinkable forms of mobility. Remember, they came into existence because of the seafaring skills of Haitian mariners sailing hundreds of miles on those vessels that we are so often told are decrepit, rickety, splintered, unseaworthy, floating septic tanks piloted by captains not competent to be at sea and in need of rescue. In other words, the discursive conditions of possibility for the policing of Haitian vessels and of Haitian seas renders these routes unthinkable for certain publics, and thus, in many ways, invisible or distorted. Again, this should bring to mind the work of Rolf Trio, Unthinkable Histories and Archival Absences. Recognizing this absence is about more than correcting a collision. It's about more than correcting an erasure. It's about understanding that forms of racialization, how they operate, what worlds of possibility they create, and how central the sea is to all of this. So let's think about these implications by shifting gears here to a more theoretical key. So George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, considered one of the founders of modern Western philosophy, saw the sea as a key element of Western greatness. As he put it, quote, "The sea invites man to conquest and to piratical plunder, but also to honest gain and to commerce. The land, the mere valley plain, attaches him to the soil. It involves him in an infinite multitude of dependencies, but the sea carries him out beyond these limited circles of thought and action. Courage is necessarily introduced into seafaring trade. Daring is joined with wisdom. The invention of the ship does the greatest honor to the boldness of man as well as to his understanding." Without getting into Hegel's idea of the dialectics of history, I'll just say that for him, seafaring power and skill was crucial to a civilization's participation in capital H. In Africa, he notes not long after these passages, in the same text, is outside of history. It remains landbound, a space of civilizational childhood enveloped in metaphorical night. So I offer this glimpse into Hegel's vision of Africa outside of history as one distillation of what Sylvia Wynter refers to as the association of Blackness with ontological that is so central to white supremacy's racial hierarchies. That is, Blackness as a form of being that is deficient. And here, this lack is imagined through the sea and the ship, or rather a lack of capacity to join the ranks of oceanic mobility and thus to enter into the making of history. The racialization of subjects and the racialization of geographies, in other words, is conceptualized in relation to and through oceanic mobility and its technologies of transport. So without productively collapsing historical epics, we can see something similar at work here with regard to these Haitian vessels, Haitian sailors, and Haitian maritime geographies of the last 50 years. My goal here is not to paint a simple romantic portrait of Haitian seafaring resistance to U.S. hegemony. Right? The story is really too complicated for that. Many of these sailors, boat owners, in addition to contesting regimes of border control and efforts to contain Haitian mobility over much of the 20th century, the 21st century, were also involved in lucrative smuggling of politically and economically vulnerable Haitians, not to mention being involved in the repressive state apparatus of the Duvalier dynasty. At the same time, though, to be clear, I do see these forms of Haitian maritime mobility as what we might call an insurgent mobility, a fugitive mobility, a wayward mobility. So instead of romanticization, the aim is to understand the workings of insidious forms of racializing common sense regarding who belongs where, who is making history, who is producing consequential geography. Part of that requires a methodological shift to an oceanic anthropology and perhaps an oceanic Haitian studies, which is also a theoretical shift that centers the ocean, that pushes against centrism, that pushes against methodological nationalism, and that reveals and illuminates geographies dismissed as peripheral, outright ignored, and rendered unthinkable, like those these Haitian navigators have created across the Northern Caribbean. Okay, thank you. So before we start the Q&A, I just want to say thank you to my research assistants, Jessica Stowe and Margot Blank, but in particular, Edson Chouy, who is here today, who has been my companion in Haiti for many years and helped me with most of this research. Thank you, Edson.
What's exciting about the work as well is because it is innovative. No one has done it yet, and we're very thankful for that. I think as I shared at the beginning, oftentimes we limit also real condition in case this various also as people who transport doing these legal both words, you see all the the diminishing of people, reduction of people to level that's astounding. But sometimes we are without really understanding that. So thank you for that work. I'm excited about the future of this school, but I do want to hear where it is amazing have been doing to overcome, to bring rules to these regimes of surveillance over in the area. Not only need the movements of people, but governments of creating their livelihood. It's super great. We've been doing this for a long time. And I just see quite well having a different group of people doing such a but I don't know how to open into new science.
Excuse my ignorance, but I'm ungovernable. Can anybody, it's not land, so what are the rules? I mean, I know they have this. They can't, you know.
Yeah, so that's a terrific question. Um, so, so I guess kind of what you're asking is how does the U.S. police ships if they're out in international? So, there's kind of two ways. You can think of policing as extend for a given territory. So Haiti is sovereign in its territorial waters, which go out to 12 nautical miles. But Haiti can say, hey, US, you can come and police within our territorial waters. They also can say, hey, if you want to board Haitian vessels in international waters, we give you permission to do so. So that's how they do it. So there's a kind of like status-based version of this. So the U.S. has permission to board any Haitian vessel suspected of carrying illegal drugs or undocumented immigrants, and then they can gain access to that vessel. Well, part of it starts with what I was referring to before, which is that, Jean-Claude Duvalier is an ally of the U.S., more or less, during the Cold War, and the arrival of asylum seekers by boats in the United States, and then the intentional publicity, I say intentional, on the part of the Haitian rights movement and the Haitian democratic movement in exile to amplify the voices of the asylum seekers testifying to the abuses of the Duvalier regime. This is embarrassing. And so kind of outsourcing the policing of the seas to keep Haitians in, to keep them from leaving, there's something appealing there for the Duvalier regime. But I think you're right. It's also about, it's tied up with aid, and
brother-in-law, like smuggling eels. I don't know.
Yeah, there was a New York Times investigative report that linked the assassination of Jovenel Moïse to disputes over who controlled the eel franchise in Haiti. That's actually the legal franchise. So it's less about smuggling and boats, but eels are a whole nother really interesting topic that I'm intrigued by as well. But that's another conversation. We can get back to it later.
You try any other national, like that
So I think there are histories of that. So all right, let me put it this way. So there's also a significant amount of maritime migration from Cuba to the United States. And Coast Guard vessels also interdict Cuban vessels. Now, what do those look like? They don't look like the Haitian ships. Right? They're more kind of typically, this isn't quite my area, but from what I know, they're more, they call them, the Coast Guard calls them chugs. Right? They're often kind of pieced together in secret of kind of mismatched pieces. They're not the product of a long history of master boat building knowledge. And so, I have another article that actually contrasts security and journalistic accounts of what Haitian vessels are like, and then North American wooden boat connoisseurs who see this as kind of the last vestiges of long tradition of working sail and boat building knowledge in the Caribbean. Okay? And then the discourses of the Haitians themselves and how they characterize their own vessels, the aesthetics of their vessels and the value of their vessels. And so from what I've been able to tell, there's nothing quite like this that still exists. Yes.
How does it happen? Is there a boat building industry in Haiti, or does it happen privately? Are these individuals getting together and building these boats?
Exactly. Well, there's lots of ways. if you go to La Tortue, all along the coast of La Tortue, there are atelier workshops where people are building not the big ships, smaller ships. Sometimes, and it's really sometimes little kids, not little kids, but young kids, right, will build smaller versions looking at the large boats that are being built. And so you'll have small vessels, and one captain that I know remembers when he was a kid, they built a little one and they would sail across from La Tortue to Port-de-Paix and buy some mangoes and come back, and that's how they learned to sail. And so you see it on the coast. There's some famous areas. So Cappadocia is known for this. La Tortue on the coast across from La Tortue, from Port-de-Paix to Saint-Dinon. Saiga and Leogan. Jeremy also has this, and some coastal cities, Patlage, Kauai, these kinds of places. It's beautiful. I love it.
I think it's not only yoga, it's also Algerian also.
Yeah.
So the ancient the American people send the Asian people the yacht of the boat person. So so my question is so what kind of relationship the American people have with the gangster on the sea, the gangster who drive the boat. So what kind of relationship do they have?
So I would say there's different types of migration, right? So oftentimes we see kind of a sailboat, lots of people on it. And I'm not saying that they're not overloaded. I'm not saying that it's not dangerous. I'm not saying that it's not expensive. That shouldn't, though, it clears the fact that this history exists, that the boat making itself involves incredible knowledge and skill. The sailing of these boats also involves incredible knowledge and skill. So the two can exist at the same time. So there are these voyages that are usually sail powered, or they're sail freighters, and sometimes there'll be motors on the back of them. And then there's other types of voyages that are more kind of professional criminal organizations, say, right? With speedboats, or you said yachts from the Bahamas. That's different. Okay, that doesn't require the same boat building skills. It often involves GPS technology. It's professionalized, very expensive, tens of thousands of dollars to go on these voyages. So they're kind of two separate things. And so I'd say in terms of the relationship, the U.S. is involved in policing and looking for those types of human smuggling operations, both types.
So why the police? So sell to the businessmen, sell the Asian people, the yacht, or the boats, because there are some gangsters. They said they buy the boats.
Oh, so you're talking about gangs in Port-au-Prince now who are purchasing. Yeah. I don't know much about that. My guess would be that they have what are called straw buyers, people in the U.S. buy the boats for them and sell them back to Haiti. And it can be difficult to prosecute that or to police that. But I don't know. My area of focus is not kind of like the gangs in Port-au-Prince and the kind of what they're buying in the U.S. I don't know.
It makes my question so wide, not relevant, but I wanted to know how much of this sea traffic also encourages the smuggling of weapons into. Whether that has to be one of ways of getting weapons in the country.
Yeah, so this is a really good question. It's complicated. So Edson lived this with me. There was a moment, what, 2024, 23, in 2022, focus was really on these small steel-hulled Haitian freighters trading with Miami. So there was this sense in journalistic accounts and TV public announcements that the guns, the weapons coming into Haiti and fueling the violence, coming in through these small freighters docking in the northwest of Haiti. Now, I don't know this for sure, but I think based on there's right now a criminal trial has just been held, right? Prosecuting the former leader of Katsam Maozo. And what he said, this is what I've read from accounts, I haven't gone into the actual documents from the trial yet, but I intend to, is that they're mostly actually coming in on containers. And so there were some weapons, as far as I could tell, rather small amounts that were being turned up in some of the freighters that were coming in through the Northwest. But, like 6 handguns or some ammunition. But from what I understand, and again, I don't know exactly what's going on, that and this is what happened with the drug policing as well. So there's all this emphasis on the freighters in the Miami River. Okay. What's the biggest cocaine bust in the history of the United States? A container vessel ran by, I think it's called MSC, in the port of Philadelphia, 20,000 tons of cocaine, which dwarfs many times over the amount of cocaine seized on the Miami River over a multi-year period. This is one single bust. Okay. So I think what often happens is players with less money are easy targets in terms of placing blame in terms of what's going on with really, really unfortunate violence that's happening in Haiti. My suspicion is that this might be stuff coming in through private ports, container vessels, people with more means than these smaller players kind of eking things out with really narrow margins in the northwest of Haiti.
I spoke with you about that, how that over policing of people smuggling other people to safer territories. There are little merchants who get caught, their boats get destroyed by the Coast Guard. There are casualties, there are people who just seeking their livelihood using fish or to do commerce who get caught with that policing and lose their livelihoods, and we don't hear about these stories.
Or even, so I went out on a Coast Guard cutter for around a week and a half to observe how to do things. And so there's a regular route between, or at that time there was, between the north of Haiti and Inaba in the southern Gulf. But the Coast Guard vessel stopped one of those sail vessels on that route. And I don't know if this is totally accurate, but my memory is they held them for like 12 hours, asking them questions, searching their vessel. Right? They were just going to Inagua to drop a group of passengers off who take them from Inagua to Nassau, right? So that's not, their vessel wasn't seized, it wasn't destroyed, right? But it's kind of like a Terry stop, right? It's like stop and frisk on the sea. That's a long time to be out there, sitting there. Maybe you don't have enough water. Maybe you didn't bring enough food because you're not planning on being out there for an extra 12 hours. Right?
And not knowing what's going
And you don't know what's going to happen.
It's detained
It's
or-
stressful. Exactly.
You find the record of how many people have lost their life doing the traversée of the Pole or even the Silk Road sometimes.
No, wait a minute.
No record at all.
But this, there are harrowing stories that I've heard. One of the most harrowing was this was in either 1991 or 1992. Someone, I think they left either Abu Dhabi or they left Haiti. Storm kicked up in the night, so it was dark. There's no lights on any of these stuff. This is a different type. This is like after the first. And there was a storm, and some boats, there were no other boats. Again, I'm not saying that vessels don't sink, right? That they're not overloaded, especially in desperate circumstances. But at the same time, a lot of these captains and crews are highly skilled and knowledgeable as well. Right? The sea is a dangerous place.
Are they passing that knowledge on to the next generations?
They are.
God.
But I think it's diminishing. Yeah, I think it's diminishing.
Other comments, questions? And two of the things that you opened up, which I'm excited about, is the necessity for this oceanography studies that you're creating the way for others to look into is extremely important in understanding not only the history of Haitians in Haiti, really significant part of the history of the world, since movement across the seas, three-quarters of the earth is covered with the sea. So that's exciting. And I also like the fact that before you started speaking, you kind of said, you cautioned us that you're not romanticizing this. However, it's a significant piece of historical knowledge for disseminated. And lastly, I love the fact that you put so much on the whole history, giving value. Because oftentimes we think we have to, and we all go to the researcher, to the book, whereas in a history such as the Haitian Oceanic history, you're going to have to rely on old historians, people who tell you the stories, you can't put them into books, etc. So if you for that informed piece about our history and the value of it, for such for this particular research and for this particular spaces that you are digging into. And lastly, could you give a little bit more of a definition of what you mean by insurgent mobility? I think I love it, but I want you to say more about that for us.
So, there's a lot of writing now, and a fair amount of it's called like the Black geographies literature. That's about Black space making practices that don't conform to, sometimes reject, sometimes challenge dominant regimes of spatial organization, expected spatial practices. And a lot of these authors tie this back to talking about before, Mawanash. Okay. So that's oftentimes where the fugitivity comes in, that term. US context, I think the link is fugitive enslaved peoples. The routes they make, right, the networks they make, that project a particular vision of who's supposed to move where, who's allowed to move where, who can be free in the way they circulate, who cannot, right? So it's insurgent in that sense. It's rejecting these dominant paradigms, these dominant frameworks, these dominant regimes. And those terms, particularly that term wayward, comes from Saidia Hartman. And she also is very particular about saying this is not about romanticization. This is not about romanticizing resistance. But still, there's something about the way people live and act and move that is not determined by these dominant frameworks and create other frameworks in the shadow of it. And so that's what I kind of want to evoke there. And so I think this Haitian maritime mobility, I mean, the idea is, you know, the US says, we're putting these cutters out there. We're going to keep Haitians in place. If they want to come to the US, they have to go through the routes that we establish, right? If they want to go trade with the Bahamas, if they want to go wherever they're going to go, they have to pass through kind of this gauntlet setup. And do the Haitian sailors say, okay, sure? No, right? They continue to move and make connections and circulate. Right? And there's a whole another dimension to this that's not always visible. Right? There are other sorts of entities, beings moving about with these ships as well, right? That facilitate their movement, right? That facilitate them not being seen by police forces. And so there's a whole interesting geography here that's created that you don't find in Coast Guard maps of policing controls. Very much is in reaction to it, but not just in reaction to it. Also, the outgrowth of Haitian projects to create worlds that sustain them, right? It's not just a rejection. Like, no, this is what we're capable of. This is what we want. This is how we chercher la vie, right? This is how we make life. And look, so that's kind of the idea there.
So I have no question, but I am not fluent in
Ou mwen di lan kriyo?
Well,
Pale kriyo.
Modelage devient complexe. Donc, comment c'est des manipulateurs, comme si peut-être qui manipulent Haïti pour les pays pour tourner ici?
Si ganham que está em uma
Manipulateur, comme ce qui. Est-ce qu'on consegue un manipulateur qui a peut-être qui bagaille ça?
Should I answer it in English? So I don't know who speaks Creole, so I don't want to answer in Creole. So the question was, is there someone who's kind of manipulating and causing people to leave Haiti one? So I mean, my answer would be no, there's not like a single entity, but you know, I would point to long-standing structures of racism and inequality and exploitation that have rendered Haiti a difficult place to live for many people. Right? And so, okay, yeah, I can explain.
Se pa radyon kren moun men konen, historikman, toujou gen plizye eleman, plizye moun, plizye entite, gen Haïti, plizye Haïti, affiche la vie. Plizye structure, racisme, égalité, exploitation.
Yes, you. Yes, you.
C'est pas un monde, non? C'est un
Yeah,
système.
we have a system. Kirasin, what is the root of the system? Kirasin system.
Nou ka di eksperyans kolonyal esklavajist ki pran
Capitaliste,
L'Europe sorti là, en Afrique,
impérialiste.
impérialiste.
Non, il dit que
Ok, est-ce qu'on vient de
livrer.
Si par exemple, tu dis 2%,
On va pas
non, moi-même, c'est anthropologue, c'est anthropologue. Et puis, son métier,
le fait qu'on travaille comme ça, il n'y a pas dit qu'on vient de pour ça.
ou bien analyse sur toute forme, sur tout plan, pour faire ça, pour faire ça, pour faire ça. Pourtant, il y a
Non, les deux ont réponse.
mais comme si il y a qui va toucher le monde là.
Elles sont capables d'expliquer pour l'éducation qui sont spécialement.
On vient de faire traduire pour le cas plus clair.
Moi, je
Je dis comme ça. Qui va en grâce à ça, est-ce qu'il va y avoir un manipulateur comme qui cause et tout ça va quitter le pays, tout va ici. Et qui va en ça aussi. Alors comme ça,
Eh bien,
C'est une conversation.
ok. Haïti commence à gagner plus masse. Nous qui étions là à partir de the late 1950s par Duvalier. Ça fait Haïti, la majorité haïtienne qui a des connaissances, de expulser ou bien ils ont quitté parce que tu as tué. L'Afrique, à l'époque, l'Afrique, tu as ouvert tout pour Haïtiens parce que tu fais pas indépendance sur le monde qui est préparé. Parce que tu as des problèmes politiques.
et la vie comme si comme un responsable qui fait le comme si
Il commence purement pas
on va
politique.
penser ici vous avez dit comme si comme ça y est là tout.
Bon, là, il dit.
Je rappelle pour l'ensemble de mon hypothèse.
Donc, allez,
Alors, quand on est à la fin c'est ça, on va plus de détails. Nous devons moi-même, ça ne s'arrête pas quand même. Nous devons plus de détails, nous avons quand même et comme si et on va travailler de ça, mais comme si le monde qui va se passer, c'est quelqu'un qui est sensible.
Donc, profiter de ça, c'est un petit morceau de un livre qui compare les recherches d'air. Ce n'est pas la même tout livre là. C'est un petit panel, un petit morceau sur un livre qui prend des années pour accumuler, pour faire recherche, pour faire travail, pour faire, je veux dire, interview, allemand, archives, etc. Pour raconter une histoire que nous ne va raconter. Histoire haïtienne qui a fait commerce dans la zone et qui a un impact sur le développement de la géographie, sur l'économie, sur la politique, sur la c'est un petit morceau de un livre qui vous console.
Ok, on pense que et pour ça, mais il nous parlait de comme device, il y a alors c'est trop documentaire de trop ça déjà. Comme tu viens de ça, c'est le travail. Comme c'est on commence à comprendre.
Et donc, la réalité qui est en tant qu'académicien, professeur, on est loin. 10 millions de monde qui est pris sur le même sujet, on doit approcher de différemment. Ça veut dire qu'il y a plein de monde qui écrit pas de ce sujet. Impossible pour nous ça faire 360 de sujets. Toujours il y a espace pour leur montrer, nous dit ça, pas dit, ça. C'est réalité, c'est ça on intellectualise. C'est pour pas jamais arriver pour que tout ça toujours.
Explication. Okay. So, normalement, comme le professeur Serra a dit, que si j'ai appris le professeur à travers son sujet. Si vous avez une question sur l'expérience, tel professeur, tel académicien, a présenté dans la recherche par rapport à l'autre, ou qu'a dit tel monde te dit tel bagaille, il semble qu'il y a une contradiction, il y a une différence entre ça qu'il te dit avec ça ou même ou te dit dans la conférence ou pas. Est-ce qu'on peut parler qu'à expliquer comment travail en recherche différent avec l'autre recherche qu'on a fait, mais il faut qu'on baille un exemple pour commencer la conversation. So, ou pas qu'à dire, mais il y a d'autres monde qui fait ça. OK? Ou dit, la façon ça, de telle façon, même, il fait le plus bien, ou by détail, comme ça, moun qui a présenté la recherche, qui a baille une réponse. OK? Mais, on seulement dit, tel monde fait le plus bien, tel monde fait le plus bien, ça n'a pas avancer. Okay. So, mais on n'a pas besoin de parler de ça pour tout le reste parce que l'autre monde qui voulait parler tout.
Nous avons arrêté parce que conversation, les questions posées sont posées sur la table, les générer l'autre idée, l'autre question, et c'est ça, l'espace académique, c'est ça, c'est créer une ouverture pour cadre l'échange, ça nous fait des gens d'apprendre, pas des gens qui ont des connaissances, nous parler de monde, parler avec des connaissances, c'est tout ça. Mais, après ce que nous faisons, nous arrêter là toujours. Et puis, nous devons dire tout. Si nous voulons, nous passons le mois nous acheter pizza qui était pour nous, avec une salade, avec un petit bagage pour nous jouer coach. Mais nous ouvrons nos conversations en continu. Contribution, question, commentaires, et nous devons parler de l'arrivée juste l'autre année. Nous ne pouvons pas faire et malgré le derrière avec l'autre aspect travail. Donc, on va continuer, mais je pense que c'est extrêmement. Ça veut dire que c'est un travail, juste pas qu'il donne le travail familial avec la communauté haïtienne. C'est l'ouvrir aux nouveaux barrières pour nous garder haïtiens, connaissance nous savons gagner. Ni nous construire bateau pour faire. Ni nous connaissance comme ça. Les gens pas gagner aucune carte dans mer. Les pas gagner carte dans mer pour changer pour ça. Pour l'osso dans nos power derrière, on va voir qui pas exactement. On a oui, on a changé pour faire la pour montrer l'autre comment faire. Ça c'est un bagage excellent. Yeah. Oui, je veux dire, c'est similairement avec les gens, on connecte les two de underground. That's how these people wanted to escape to freedom. They studied the skies and they followed the stars that could point to the north to get away from the hostile space that US was for them. That knowledge of the sea, knowledge of the sky, is who are illiterate sometimes or semi-illiterate is something impressive and something that needs positive light as this text is doing and other people you encourage you to do so. It's really important. You know, it's that knowledge, deep important knowledge that is not valued because it's produced by these black bodies.
Je pense que le problème, c'est nous souvent, on va avec chez nous, ça.
There's an element to that in this one. Yes, now we're talking. That's
what I said at the end. I was hinting at that. Ça va si j'ai talk ma page hier. Mais donc on a pu
mais ça comme si bagaille ça comme si il voulait leur dire pas de bagaille.
Il dans travail monsieur.
Travail ça veut dire bagaille.
Mais quel vous partagez l'histoire, il minimiser contribution yo la question connaissance là mais par exemple phénicien yo. Est-ce que phénicien yo pas une catégorie comme ça tout côté que yo pas penser yo était qu'à maîtriser là mais yo était voyager à pas quel côté ouais depuis longtemps Parce que même l'aime d'aller étudier, c'était Christophe Colomb, c'était un série de monde comme ça, il y a des ouais, comme gros navigateurs, on va une série de bails comme ça. Bah, j'aime connaître, c'est récemment, on va apprendre phénicien ou bien c'est de l'autre groupe, qui maîtriser l'en-mer comme ça, qui maîtriser et construction bateau, on sait de bails comme ça. Ouais.
So absolutely, absolutely. So Polynesians. So, but there has been more recently kind of a renaissance and an interest in the skills, the brilliance of Polynesian navigators. And there's the navigation societies in Hawaii that kind of retrace the roots of ancient Polynesian navigators and boats built in the way they would have been built. And so that has started to happen, that recognition. But not so with the Haitians, right? It's a different tradition. The scale isn't the same, but there's something here worth looking at, recognizing, celebrating as well. But they're connected. Right? That fits in with questions about racialization and who has the capacity to do what, and who, because those navigators are, the Polynesian and the Micronesian navigation skills are also amazing. They can read wave interference patterns, right? And they can see things beneath the surface that our eyes aren't even trained to see. And so there's a lot of incredible skills and knowledge out there that hasn't been recognized for exactly what you're talking about. Very important point.
We can stay 5 more minutes. Welcome, comments, questions. 5 more minutes. Okay.
Future wise, like there's a navigation Haitian. What does it look like? We're not exactly in the future as it pertains to navigation, at least some aspect of boat making. How do we bring that knowledge that the modern societies, whatever modern cultures have now, with technology? How do we bring that to Haitian navigation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So a couple of things. So one, I wouldn't say. So I resist the urge, which you find often in the descriptions of this boat making, that North American wooden boat making connoisseurs write about, which is that this is something that exists from another time that's in our time. It's like something from history. It's like a living museum. It's not a living museum. These are people in the present, right? Is there anything more modern than moving people across international borders because of contemporary political situations, moving secondhand goods that is the kind of discarded products of the capitalist system in Miami to a system that is in part a country that is in part the way it is because it's also part of that capitalist system in an unequal relation. So this is all part of modernity too, I guess. Now it's true, you're not wrong. Like I understand your instincts, yes, but these are techniques that are old. But the techniques that are old being put in play in a very contemporary, modern way. Now, in terms of boat making, like bringing a boat making industry to Haiti, there really isn't wooden boat making for practical purposes any longer, right? Wooden boats are kind of leisure items for the well-to-do sailing set. There are motorized ones as well, but it's kind of like thing for connoisseurs. So that's not going to happen in Haiti. And there are questions. Like someone asked a question: is this knowledge being transmitted? It is, but it's the policing restrictions on Haitian mobility. They do have an impact. So there were wooden sail freighters up until very recently that would go to the Abacos, right, and provide Haitian drinks, Haitian agricultural products, the things that the Haitians there wanted from home until very recently. But after, I forget the hurricane, do you remember, Lily, that hit the Abacos past, I think it was like 2019 maybe, that kind of devastated the Haitian communities there and then sparked a crackdown in the Bahamas on undocumented Haitian populations. They cut off all those routes. I don't think it was Matthew. Matthew was 2016. So those routes have been contracted. And so right now, my understanding is there's some boats that go to Turks and Caicos that go to but as an interesting thing that's happening now is because of the way the gangs are closing off the roads to the capital, coastal routes become hugely important. Okay? So in some ways, there's an efflorescence of movement of goods on the Haitian coast and building of boats for that purpose. There's also the salt trade in Haiti, which is really important. So there's routes from the Saline, some of it's in the northwest, some of it's in the Artibonite, and they go from Jeremy, from those sites to Jeremy to the capital. So there's still a vital coastal trade. Those international routes of wooden sail vessels. So that's, in terms of the future, it may disappear.
Yeah, I was interested in hearing about your holistic field work for this project. Like, who did you get to interview? How did you get to be contact? And what were some of the main topics that you discussed?
Yeah, so this is, so interviews for my first book. I did a lot of interviews with folks that have been on migration voyages to the United States, many of whom were interdicted and ended up at Guantanamo. And that fieldwork was actually rather easy. People were very open, they wanted to talk about it in Haiti. And, you know, boat building itself, I did a lot of that fieldwork in Jérémie, which is a particular part of Haiti. The Northwest is another part of Haiti, right? In the Northwest, subjected to more intensive U.S. policing operations. If you're in Port-au-Paix, every day, twice a day, U.S. helicopters fly overhead. The Coast Guard cutters come through the Canal de la Manche on purpose. Why? To say, look, we're here. Don't try it. Right? So there's a palpable sense that, like, there's the U.S. policing presence. And there absolutely is also kind of networks of informants. So that's an environment that's a little bit less trustworthy. Rightfully so, right? There's a lot of skepticism. So in those environments, little by little, slowly over time, stuff that helps actually is doing field work in Miami and in Haiti. So meeting people in a different context and then having them see how I'm connected to other people that they know. And then also, you know, traditional participant observation type methods, like actually going on the boats, right? That's a big signal, right? If you're willing to get on a sail, you know, not a sail freighter, motorized freighter and spend 4 or 5 days going down to Haiti, right? If you're willing to get on a sail freighter and go from Port-au-Paix to Inagua, you know, that's something, right? You get to know people. They become more comfortable. And then you can have these other conversations that, you know, as Lily was saying, it's really important. This is going to disappear, right? These histories are going to disappear. So, you know, I don't have to be the one who collects them. Well, that's a good idea.
But you know, if you please feel free to use us as your possible.
So future generations can hear me speaking
But I like your question because what I wanted to hear more, because you mentioned the Louis like a major family who's been part of this movement. How many such families were you able to identify?
Well, they're the ones, like, if you talk to anyone in the Northwest, it's the Lower Stones.
The original OGs.
Exactly, yeah. So I've talked to other families too. Um, I'm not quantitative, so I don't have like a number, like how many families I've talked to. And then sometimes you find out they're actually still close in their family. Oh yeah, that's my cousin. Yeah.
It's the same family.
Yeah, but so, I mean, all across multiple families who get engaged.
Please help me say thank you for this work. And I want you to also know, see, people are focused on it. Also, thank you so much, Patrick, for being here. Tomorrow night, Professor Khan, no one in the community as Jeff will be at Ambatonel. And you'll see Patrick again. He'll have many more questions for you. We'll be at Ambatonel to talk about this because part of the research being started here, talking to people who've taken those and were paroled into the United States after the coup d'etat against Haiti in 1991. Yeah, so that was the germinating space. So you'll hear, you'll see Patrick again about this.
Looking forward to it.
Did you have a question before we break?
Yeah.
A picture here, or two questions.
Yeah, my question basically was, what was your biggest challenges or difficulties you have when you was doing those research?
The biggest challenge is always just getting past people's skepticism of my motives. Which I understand, right? That skepticism is often well deserved. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And sometimes you get past it, and sometimes you don't. It depends on the person, and you have to respect that skepticism and that, not everyone wants to talk with you. And you make good use of the friendships that you make with other people, and the conversations that you have. So I'd say that's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, just thank you so much because I'm really interested in this work as part of the Blue Humanities, and I think it fills in a very much needed gap. So I'm just wondering, and you touched on it a little bit, about other spaces and within the whole Blue Humanities that you think can be researched a little bit further. And you touched on it a little bit in this talk, but anything else that you came across writing this book that you said, you know what, we need more research on this or that. And you might have included, you probably did include it in your book, in your conclusion. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, a lot of that Blue Humanities stuff is more in the second book, even though I kind of touched on it a little bit in the first book. But so there's some really interesting scholars working on other areas. So one is Nidhi Mahajan, who's at UC Santa Cruz. And she works on DAO networks between India, the Gulf states, and the coast of Africa, Horn of Africa. That's fantastic. These are also wooden vessels, and they're in part made of wood because they get a certain kind of regulatory classification for being made as such that allows them to do certain things that a steel vessel wouldn't be. So that's one kind of network that I'm just fascinated by. Jatin Dua writes about that as well. There's a woman, and I'm so embarrassed that I'm forgetting her name right now, but I'll remember it and I can get it to you. But she works on Southeast Asia and Indonesia in particular, and she follows kind of like the movements of Majao traders. Also incredibly fascinating. Now our Benyahada works on fishers in Tunisian and Sicilian. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's happening. And I always assume there's other areas that I just don't know about. I'm waiting for people to tell me about them so that I can kind of include it. Because this talk I just gave Monday was about thinking about minor logistics. So we hear about logistics, enormous container vessels with 20,000 containers on them, right? Just like the one that crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. But there's a limited number of ports that can receive those vessels. And goods get transported through these smaller, we don't hear about them, right? So I know a little bit about Haiti and Haiti. There's also connections between Haiti and Louisiana as well. It's not; those aren't really Haitian-owned vessels. But there's all that there's all kinds of other stuff going on, and we're just waiting for people to tell us about them. Yeah, great question.
Thank you so much. Amazing talk.
Thank you.
Exploration with your Haitian seas or the Northern Caribbean Sea. We invite all of you to join us over there. Thank you.
Thank you.